Our scripture this morning is found in page 953 of your Pew Bible. We'll be reading 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22 through chapter 2, verse 3. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart, since you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and abiding Word of God. For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers, and the flower fails, but the word of the Lord remains forever. And this word is the good news that was preached to you. So put away all malice, and all deceit, and hypocrisy, and envy, and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation, if indeed you have tested that the Lord is good. He is good, and all people said, amen.
Thank you, Jim. So in the Broadway musical turned movie Les Mis, Jean Valjean is arrested for stealing a loaf of bread, if I'm remembering correctly, something along those lines. And he is imprisoned for 19 years. When he finally gets out of prison, he finds it very difficult to find work because of his criminal history. And so he finds himself wandering. And eventually, one night, he finds himself in the home of a priest. A priest takes him in, gives him food, gives him shelter. But because Jean Valjean has been so hardened by his time in prison, he does not respond with the gratitude you might expect. In fact, he goes the other direction. And in the middle of the night, once the priest has gone to sleep, he steals some valuable silver from the priest's belongings and slips out and leaves. The following morning, the police show up at the priest's house with Jean Valjean, and they tell the priest, they say, well, we caught this man with your belongings, and he had the nerve to say that you gave them to him. And then the priest does something very strange. The priest says, my dear friend, yes, of course I gave these to him, but you forgot the most valuable items. And he goes back and he gets a couple of very valuable candlesticks and gives them to the man. And the police officers stand there bewildered by this strange priest. Today we're continuing in our series called Love Your Neighbor. And the heart of this series, at the heart of the Christian faith, is this claim that as Christians, we are saying we have come to know God. That's what a Christian is claiming, that they've come to know God, that God has made a way for us to come to know him, to be in relationship with him. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we know that somebody knows God? And what emerges from that is that as God works in you, as the Spirit of God works in you, you will be able to love your neighbor more and more. Right? Never perfectly. We're always a work in progress. But the more the Spirit works in us, evidence that the Spirit is at work is that we're able increasingly to love our neighbors. And so we've been exploring this theme of love your neighbor. And we've been exploring, what does this look like? We've looked at the question of who? Who is my neighbor? Who am I called to love? How am I to love my neighbor? Practically, what does that look like? How much am I to love my neighbor? And as we continue in this series, as we come to this passage that was read from the book of 1 Peter that Jim read, we discover really the question of what. what will happen if we love the way God calls us to love? What will be the result of that? And indeed, how might others respond if we loved the way God calls us to love? And I think that what emerges from this passage is this. The more we love people the way God calls us to love, the more strange we will look to others. The more we love people the way God calls us to love, the more strange we will look to others. As is that example, this priest from Les Mis, he loves in a way that is just strange and bewildering to the police officers who come before him. Okay, so we see this in this passage. This passage that Jim read is from the book of 1 Peter. This is a letter that was written sometime in the 1st century A.D., part of the early Christian community, and it is written by Peter to the churches in the area of Asia Minor. That's what it was called then. Today, that would be modern-day Turkey. So as the Christian faith grew, these churches were popping up, these communities of Christians were popping up all over modern-day Turkey, and so Peter writes this letter to them. And at the beginning of the letter, he says something that sort of sets the tone for everything else that will be said in this letter. This is what he says here. This is verse 1 of this letter. It says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. Now, this language, the elect exiles of the dispersion, it operates at two kind of different levels. There's two things we kind of draw from this. One is, this is the language, any first century Jew would recognize this language as the language referring to God's covenant people, elect exiles of the dispersion. To a first century Jew, they would see that as referring to them, the Jewish people, the people chosen by God to fulfill his purposes in the world. The elect, the chosen ones, exiles. That word exiles, that was a word that was increasingly used of the Israelite people ever since the Babylonians had come and conquered Jerusalem and exiled many of the Israelites to Babylon. And that was in the 6th century, so about 600 years before this letter was written. And even after the Israelites were allowed to return to Israel, they still sort of saw themselves as exiles. They never really got control of their land. Things were never quite the same. And so this language of being exiles continued to carry on even into the 1st century. And then when it talks about elect exiles of the dispersion, the Greek word there is the word diaspora, and that was a word that had come to refer to Jews living outside of Palestine, living in Asia Minor and whatnot. But what's interesting is that Peter takes this language and he uses it not to refer simply to those who are ethnically Jewish. He uses it to refer to the Christian community. He uses it to refer to Christians, both Jew and Gentile, irrespective of their ethnicity. At this point, probably the majority of Christians were Jewish because it started as a Jewish movement. But he's referring to, he's using this language of the covenant people to refer to Christians, because what he's saying is that the covenantal promises of God have now come to those who are the followers of the Messiah, the followers of Jesus, whether they are Jew or Gentile. They are the covenant people. So that's one thing that we can draw from those three words. But there's also something that emerges in the language that is used and the point that he wants to remind them of when he calls them elect exiles of the dispersion. And this comes through in the way that the NIV translates it. Look how the NIV translates this passage. It says this, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, strangers in the world. Seems like what Peter wants to highlight is, hey, this world and the way this world operates is different than the way we're called to live. We're going to live in ways that are going to make us strange, that are going to set us apart from those around us. And that sets the tone for the letter. And so then throughout the letter, we hear Peter talking about what this strange way of living looks like. Just a little bit farther down in that same chapter, chapter 1, He says this, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. And this word holy is a word that really just means to be set apart. God is holy because he's the ultimate example of being set apart, being different, being other. But that's really what it means to be holy. And when Christians are called to be holy, there's this set apartness. There's this sense of being different in a way that is indeed going to look strange. And in those verses right there, one of the things that emerges, the sort of strange way in which Christians are called to live, is Christians' strange way of approaching the concept of freedom. You see, what Christians come to understand is that freedom requires restraint. That may sound like an oxymoron, right? Freedom requires restraint. And we live in a culture that thinks that the only path to freedom is freedom. Like you just need total freedom. And in fact, you need to be free to what? Follow your passions. That's the idea. The ultimate freedom is found through being able to give into and follow whatever my passions are. That's where true freedom is going to come. And if you try to restrain those passions, restrain my ability to follow those passions, that's not going to lead to freedom. But the Christian perspective is a little bit different. Because what he's actually saying is do not be conformed by your passions. In other words, your passions are trying to restrict you, and you need to restrict your passions. You need to put limits on your passions, and that will actually lead to freedom. There's this idea that actually total freedom does not lead to freedom. And I was sort of reminded of this a number of years ago, sort of, I think, a vivid illustration. There was a movie that came out, and I don't remember what it was about astronauts in space, right? And I can't remember what they were doing up there. But anyway, one of the astronauts, something goes wrong, and he ends up, he's doing like a spacewalk, walking out on the spaceship in his spacesuit, and he's connected to the ship, right? Well, something goes wrong, I can't remember what, and he gets detached, and so now he's just drifting through space. So there's no longer anything restraining him. He's completely free. I mean, there isn't anything for thousands of miles to restrain him. He is in a complete state of freedom. He can move, he can wiggle. There's no restrictions, no restraint. And in that complete freedom, he is completely trapped. That total freedom, there's nothing to push off of. There's nothing to pull onto. And so though he, in one sense, is completely free, he's actually completely restricted. And I think this serves as an illustration of how total freedom does not actually lead to freedom. That there is a place for restraining our passions. Jesus talks about following him. He uses the imagery. He says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And when he's talking about a yoke, he's talking about the harness that a farmer would put on an oxen when they were looking to plow the field. And that was there to, the yoke was there to help sort of control the ox. And what Jesus is saying is, you need to let me put that on you. And let me control you. Let me put some restraint on your life. And that actually will lead to freedom. But this idea that restraint brings freedom, if we live that way, that will seem strange. That will seem strange in our society. This theme of the strangeness of Christian living continues on. Verse 22 of chapter 1, the first verse that Jim read today, says, having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth for a sincerely, having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth. That's as far as I wanted to go on that verse for now. Okay. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth. That word purified actually is a word that has the same root as the word holy. So it's another reference to this set apartness of the Christian way of life. And this is done through obedience. So obedience to God will make us seem strange in many respects. Now, the question is this, and this is what emerges in the second part of this verse. This obedience to God, how does this obedience to God manifest itself? And here's how obedience to God manifests itself. Obedience to God manifests itself as, here it is, love for others. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth, for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart. So we see this strangeness of the Christian living, the obedience to God, this strange freedom which comes from obedience to God, and that obedience to God leads to a strange love. And what I want to do here now is look at 6 elements of this strange love that God is calling us to. 6 elements that emerge in this letter and in this passage that was just read. Okay, the first of these 6 elements is that this strange love is a brotherly love. It's a brotherly love. And the word there for that's translated as brotherly love, I like to highlight this just because people don't realize this, it's one word. It's the word Philadelphia. Anyone ever heard of the word Philadelphia? Well, the word Philadelphia, the city Philadelphia, is the combination of 2 Greek words, phileo, which means love, and adelphos, which means brother. So it's the city of brotherly love. And that's actually the word that is used here. Philadelphia. And so what this is highlighting is this brotherly love. And what this is getting at is to love with a brotherly love is to love people who are not a part of your family as if they are part of your family. It's to love somebody who's not your brother as if they are your brother. To love your sister as if. To love someone who's not your sister, to love someone who's not your sister as if they were your sister. It's this idea that we love people not because of even our ethnic heritage. We don't love people, so that it moves beyond simply just loving your family. It points to this idea of loving people who are very different from you. They're not part of your family. They might not be a part of your ethnicity. They might not be a part of your nationality. They might not be a part of your same politics. They might not be a part of your same affinity group, whatever that might be. It's this idea of a willingness to love everyone, no matter how different they are. And so what this creates is this incredibly diverse community. So the Christian church is at its best when it embraces diversity. And I don't just mean ethnic diversity. Of course, that's certainly true as well. But again, diversity in all the different ways in which diversity manifests itself. Diversity in age, diversity in interest, diversity in personality. The point is we tend to, and we've talked about this already in this series, we tend to love the people that are like us. We tend to want to love those with whom there's an easier kind of connection. Isn't that right? But within the Christian community, we're called to love a diversity of people. I think that some of my favorite experiences as a Christian in the church have been some of those experiences when I've had a widely diverse group of people get together. And sometimes it's really weird. And it's strange and odd, and I love it because it represents the church. I love it when a group of people get together, you're like, nobody would ever predict that these people would get together. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, they have very little, if anything, in common. And yet they get together and they love one another. Right? That's brotherly love. Okay, so strange love. First element of this strange love is a brotherly love. Then, as we move down to verse 1 of chapter 2, we're going to see 4 more dimensions that just sort of emerge here. It says in verse 1, so put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Okay, so we see 4 different qualities, characteristics of strange love. 4. Okay, I'm seeing if you guys are paying attention, because if you are, you're like, Kevin, there's actually 5 there. Did you count, Kevin? There's actually 5. Well, okay, so the first word, malice, it's a word in the original that seems to refer to evil in general. So it's a general word about evil or misconduct. And then the next 4 words seem to sort of flesh out different elements of this evil. So that's why there's four that we're going to highlight here. And so the person of strange love is a person who puts these things off, gets rid of these things. A person of strange love is a person who lives with, first one, no deceit. There's no deceit in the way they live, in the way they talk. They don't try to twist the story, twist their words. They try to be as honest and truthful about things as they can. There's no hidden agenda. Now, I think in our society today, this is something that people are incredibly skeptical of. And this is something that I think we can acknowledge. This is a positive thing about the society in which we live, is that we have come to realize, and this is okay to embrace this, that the reality is everybody does approach things from their own perspective, right? So when you do tell a story, you do kind of tell the story from your perspective. Everyone always has sort of their side to a story. I mean, if you have kids, you know what this is like. Your two kids get in a fight. You hear a loud noise and a scream coming from upstairs. You call the kids down and you ask them what happened. And you can get two very different stories, right? And the reality is, it's just true. We all kind of see things from our own perspective. Now, the problem is in our society, some people have then come to say, well, then that just means there's no such thing as truth. You can't know anything because it's just people's perspective and they have their opinion and you have your opinion. And I would suggest, I just say, hey, calm down, society. Let's chill out here a little bit. Yes, it's true. We do come at it from our own perspective, but that doesn't mean that we can't get at some sort of truth, even if that truth maybe isn't as simple as maybe one person wants to cast it. Maybe it's not as black and white as we'd like it to be. Maybe it's a little bit more gray. Cultural anthropologist Clifford Geertz says that truth must be described with a thick description. A thick description. It can't always be reduced to simple statements, but that doesn't mean that truth isn't accessible. And what I love, and this is what I love about the Bible, is I think the Bible acknowledges this reality just in the way the Bible is put together. And here's what I mean. If you grew up in the church, you may just have taken this for granted and never thought about how kind of strange this is. But in the Bible, there is not one account of the life of Jesus. You ever noticed this? There's not. There's actually 4 accounts of the life of Jesus. There's the Gospel of Mark, Luke, John, and what's the other one? Matthew. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those 4 accounts. And of course, there's a lot of similarity. I mean, mostly they're similar. They're talking about Jesus' life. The sort of big things that happened in his life, they pretty much cover, right? Oh, but they're different. They tell them differently. And it's clear that each gospel writer had an angle, had a certain perspective, something that they wanted to draw out. And of course, in our modern world, that drove everybody nuts. Because in our modern world, we like it neat and tidy and black and white. But one of the things I love about our postmodern world is we're a little more open to gray. And we realize, hey, you know what? We don't need to be trying to sort out all the tensions within the Gospels. We need to realize that a thick description of who Jesus is being painted, and it's all the richer because of it. So truth must be painted in a thick description, but that doesn't mean you have a license to just say whatever you want. It doesn't mean that you can just twist the words to make yourself look better. And that's really what this is looking at. Or I'll just give you an example. I love, in the movie My Cousin Vinny. Okay, so this is an example of twisting words. In the movie My Cousin Vinny, this college kid, Billy Gambini, he gets arrested and charged with committing murder. He went into a convenience store, and a little bit later, the clerk at the convenience store was shot, and so they're accusing him. He didn't do it, but he was there there in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there's this scene where the police detective is interviewing Billy, or interrogating, or whatever you call it. And he's getting him to explain, okay, so when did you go into the convenience store? And then what did you do after you go in? And at one point, the detective is just getting impatient because he really thinks that he did it. And he's like, well, when did you shoot the clerk? And Billy he's just bewildered. He doesn't even realize that this guy's been killed. And he goes, I shot the clerk? I shot the clerk? I shot the clerk? And it's clear in the context, he's asking a question, he's bewildered. Later on in the movie, the detective goes and twists that and says that he confessed in his office. He said 3 times, I shot the clerk. And see, that's deceit. That's twisting words. And that's an obvious example. But the point is, as Christians, we can't have any part in that. We've got to be truthful to the greatest degree we can, recognizing our own biases and our own perspectives. We have to be truthful even when it hurts, even when we are disadvantaged because of that. And if we live this way, if we truly live with no deceit, this will mark us out as strange. Okay, so no deceit. A person of strange love is a person with no deceit. Secondly, within this list of 4, no hypocrisy. Put off all hypocrisy. So the word that is used here for hypocrisy in this passage, it's a word that in the ancient world during the Greco-Roman period, the period in which the New Testament was written, it was a word that referred to the masks that actors would wear. So in Greek theater, it was common that an actor, if they were playing a different role, they would put on a mask. So, now he's the police officer, Now he's the baker wearing a different mask. And so this word came to be used as a way of saying, you're like those actors that just put on a mask. You're putting on a face. And so what this is really getting at, the person who puts off hypocrisy is a person who is just authentic, is genuine, who doesn't try to hide who they are. And I think these 2 levels of authenticity can kind of operate at 2 levels. First of all, the person who puts off hypocrisy is a person who does not hide their struggles. Right? They don't just put a smile on their face and act like everything is fine when really there are some real issues in their life, some real problems that they're dealing with, some challenges in their marriage. The religious communities have a tendency to be bad at this. Religious communities are sort of bent towards hypocrisy because in religious communities there is this strong push to be good, right? To be better, right? And so because there's that strong push, there's a tendency to act like you are even when you're not, to act like things are together even when they're not. And Jesus calls out the religious people of his day precisely for living this way. Look what he says about the Pharisees and the scribes, the religious leaders of his day. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness." Right? But isn't that the temptation? To put on a good face even though things inside are falling apart? I have to tell you that one of the more encouraging things for me in the last couple months has been the Monday night community group that has been meeting at our house. And honestly, one of the things that has just made it a joy for me is the authenticity with which people have approached it. That really some of us only getting to know each other for a short period of time, people are opening up about struggles in their life, challenges that they're dealing with, not just pretending everything is fine, right? I mean, how many of us, here's the truth, how many of us ever driven to church, you walk in church with a big smile on your face, but the reality was you and your spouse were fighting the entire drive home over here, right? That's what we tend to do. And what I've really appreciated is that in this group, people have been willing to be open, to be authentic, to be genuine. When we do that, when we're honest, that's going to mark us out as strange. Okay, so that's the first level of authenticity that we're talking about when we talk about putting off hypocrisy. But I'd like to highlight another one as well, and that is that increasingly, as God works in our lives, our love for others will not just be a matter of us putting on a mask. And here's what I mean by this. I think sometimes we love others because we just know we're supposed to do it. Right? Yes, I should probably do that. I should do that good thing. And the reality is, it's not really stemming out of a real heartfelt love. It's just this is what I'm supposed to do. And so what you're really doing is just putting on a mask. Now, the problem with this is that you can only put on a mask for so long. I remember when I was like 12 or something like that, and Halloween, went trick-or-treating, and I put on one of those. I think I was like a goblin or something like that. I don't know. And I had this little mask, little plastic mask with the elastic, snap in the back, And I put that mask on, going trick or treating. But boy, I tell you what, after a few hours, I just had to take that mask off. Right? This is very uncomfortable. And the reality is, when loving others is not really coming from our heart, a heart of love, you just can't do it very long. I mean, you might be able to show love to a woman long enough to get her to marry you, right? If you do it quickly, right? But then over time, she'll realize, oh my gosh, wait a minute, right? My point is, you can't wear the mask forever. And the reality is that, see, the more God works in our lives, the more that mask becomes who we really are. That mask of love no longer becomes a mask, or at least increasingly so, as God works in us, right? And so then it ends up becoming who we genuinely are. Okay, so the person of strange love is a person who puts off deceit, puts off hypocrisy. Thirdly, the person of strange love is a person of no envy. They put off all envy. And I tell you, if you're able to do this, this really will mark you off as strange. Isn't it true that many of us just live in a place of envy? We drive around envious of somebody else's house. We drive around envious of somebody else's car. What was that? Tesla. Okay. Envious of somebody else's Tesla. I appreciate your honesty and authenticity, Dan. That was very good. Right? We're envious of their job. We're envious of their spouse. We're envious of any number of different things. And strange love comes. Here's where it gets really strange, is when you can rejoice in the good fortune of others as much as in yourself. Think about that. See, that's not normal. We usually only rejoice with our own good fortune. But this kind of love, this strange love that puts off envy, enables us actually to rejoice in other people's good fortune. And here's the great thing about this, okay? Here's what this does. And this is something I want to encourage you with. What this allows you to do is to diversify your joyfolio. Putting off envy allows you to diversify your joyfolio. You can groan. I realize that's bad. You guys have all heard of diversifying your portfolio, right? So in financial terms, you diversify your portfolio. So you don't put all of your eggs in one basket. You invest in a lot of different stocks, blah, 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 so that, okay, if this one does well, then you'll do well. But, it's just, okay, so here's what I'm saying. Think of it this way. Diversifying your joyfolio means finding many different avenues to joy. And here's the reality. Putting off envy will immediately diversify your joyfolio. Think about it this way. See, most of us only find joy when things go well for us. But imagine all the joy that is available to you if you can rejoice in other people's good fortunes. I mean, there's 7-8 billion people on this planet? I mean, there's so many sources for joy if you can rejoice in everybody else's good fortune. And honestly, I think some of the most joyful people I've met, I realize this is what's going on. They're just able to rejoice in other people's good fortune. So not only does this bring you great joy, but it's also going to mark you off as strange. Okay, so putting off, so it's no deceit, no envy, no hypocrisy. Fourthly, putting off slander. The person of strange love is a person who gets rid of slander. And I think I'd like to highlight two ways I think this is important. One, and this doesn't get to the heart of slander, but it can end up being a kind of it. And that is when we just misrepresent people because we just don't really take the time to check to see if what we're saying is true. And the reason I say this is because in the advent of social media, people post things that can often be very critical of others, and they really just don't know what they're talking about. They're just reposting something that somebody else posted. And as Christians, we gotta be really careful about that, because that's happening all the time. People post things that just simply are not true, but they don't really take the time to investigate it. I like to say, be quick to listen. This is James 1:22. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to post on Facebook. Okay, there's some scholars are a little bit, they're debating what it actually says there, but that's my take on it. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to post on Facebook. That we just have got to hold back, because when even if we're not intending to say something incorrect, we're slandering, we're misrepresenting people, and so we need to just kind of hold back on that. But really, when we get at the heart of slander, we're talking about something even more egregious, and that is an intentional desire to bring somebody down. What slander is like this. I don't know if you guys ever would do this. I grew up in Wyoming, and we even got more snow than you get here. And when it would snow, then the snow plows would come, and they would shovel all the snow into these huge piles, these huge hills. And then the kids, we would all go, and we would play King of the Hill. Guys, do you remember this? And so the whole point of King of the Hill is to be the one standing on top of the mountain, and you do anything you can to get anybody else off the mountain. So somebody else is on the top of the mountain, you just grab them and you pull them down, right? Okay, that's what slander is like. It's like King of the Hill. It's when you intentionally tear somebody down, and usually when we do this, it's to build ourselves up. Because there's something that's some sort of sick joy that we get out of tearing other people down that makes us feel better about ourselves. And of course, as Christians, this is not love. Strange love puts off all slander, does not tear people down. No matter what they're doing to us, we don't respond in kind. Okay. So we're called to love with this strange love, to put off deceit and envy and slander, hypocrisy, to love with a brotherly love. Well, now we need to get at the heart of what this strange love is. What is it? What is at the core of a person who's able to love with this strange love? And here's what it is. The root of these 4 dimensions of strange love is selflessness. So deceit, slander, hypocrisy, envy, it's selflessness that is ultimately the core of this. That all of those permutations of sin actually are the result of selfishness. And so we see the selflessness of this strange love emerging again in verse 22. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart. Now, I emphasized the wrong word there. Sorry. Okay. Love one another. And the word love there, and I put it in italics, the word love there is the word agapao. Agapao. In Greek, there are different words that are translated as love. There's phileo, right? That's friendship love, from which we get Philadelphia, brotherly love. There's phileo. There's eros, which is really for romantic love. And the Bible translates all of those as love. But then there's agapao. And agapao, which is the word that is used here, is a word for selfless, sacrificial love. So at the root of all of this, our ability to put off envy, slander, deceit, hypocrisy, is selflessness. And we see this word earnestly. It says to love one another earnestly. So pursue this selfless love earnestly. And this word earnest, it's only used 2 other times in the New Testament. It's used one time when Peter is in prison and the church is praying earnestly for him to get out of prison. And the only other spot that it's used is when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he is earnestly praying that he wouldn't have to go to the cross. And he's praying so diligently that it says that he drips or he sweats drops of blood. That's how earnestly he was praying. And so using this word here, it's saying earnestly pursue this kind of selfless love. So I just want to ask you all a question, and this is a question I ask of myself as well. How earnestly are we pursuing this kind of strange, selfless love? How much of a priority is it to us to become genuinely loving people? When you think about priorities in your life, You think about things you want to grow in or accomplish this year. You might be thinking, well, I'm hoping to get a promotion at work. Would love to see some growth in that area. I want to get some exercise, right? I want to try to get in shape, grow in that area. I really want to spend some time outdoors. It's a priority of mine, right? How many of us is it a priority to grow in loving others? I'd encourage you. This is what marks us out as this strange love is when we're able to see this as a high priority. Now, this of course leads to a deeper question then. Suppose I really do want this. Suppose I'm like, you're right. I want to make this a priority. I want to make loving others selflessly a major priority in my life. The question is, how do I go about doing this? How do I become a person of strange love? And here's what emerges in the last couple of verses in this passage. Like newborn infants long for pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. You see, friends, this is where we get to the very heart of the gospel, the very heart of the Christian faith. And that is that love comes from God. Your ability to love others is directly related to how much you are in connection with God. God is what enables us to love. Right? This is the whole point. If all you hear from me is you need to be a better neighbor, you need to try harder, then you're going to miss the entire point. Trying harder will not work. I mean, how many of us have tried that? You've just tried to love. You just tried to love harder. And honestly, how's that going for you? It just doesn't work. Because you're not able on your own to love the way God calls you to love. You got to know that. You are not able on your own to love the way God has called you to love. But fortunately, we have a God who loves us even though we aren't good at loving. And he wants to come and be a part of our lives and work in us and shape us and change us. And as the Spirit of God works in us, then more naturally we will be able to love. It won't be something you're having to force. I'm not saying it's always going to be easy. But the more God works in us and changes us and works through us, the more we are naturally able to love others. So if you really want to become a person of strange love, here's what we need to do. Here's what it is. Pursue Jesus like a baby pursues milk. Right? That's the image that's used in this passage. I love it. Pursue Jesus like a baby pursues milk. That's how you become a person of love, is by pursuing God. It's not actually first and foremost through trying to love others harder. No, it's through pursuing Jesus, pursuing your relationship with him. And as he works in you, you're able to love. So we're to pursue Jesus like a baby pursues milk. I don't know if you've ever looked into the eyes of a mother with a newborn. You probably haven't, because their eyes are like barely open, right? It's hard to look into the eyes of a woman who just had a child because her eyes are almost always closed, right? I mean, you look into the eyes of a woman who recently had a newborn baby, and what does it look like? Well, it looks like the life has been sucked out of them, because quite literally it has. Life has been sucked out of them, because a newborn baby, there is only one thing on their mind. If they are awake, there is one thing that they want. 10 o'clock at night, midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 2:02 in the morning, 3:07 in the morning. If they are awake, there is one thing that they want. There is one thing they are going after. They are pursuing that milk. And this is the illustration. This is the image that Peter uses to drive home. Listen, pursue God like a baby pursues milk. Make that your number one priority. Cast everything else aside. Sleep, go to the bathroom, and pursue Jesus, right? That's about all babies do. Sleep, go to the bathroom, and right? Pursue Jesus, sleep, and go to the bathroom. That's it. Those are the three things that you should be doing because that's all a baby ever does. Friends, if we want to become a people of strange love, we do this by pursuing Jesus, by asking him to come into our lives, to work in us and through us, that as we love, all we're doing is representing him. All we're doing is showing people the love that God has for them. In the end, it isn't even about us loving them. It's about us allowing God to love them through us because he is the source of all love. How do we become a people of strange love? Pursue Jesus like a baby pursues milk. We now come to our time of communion. What is communion? Communion is an opportunity to pursue Jesus.